Our dearest lovable family, we want to sincerely appreciate your love and support so far. You guys are awesome. Thank you for all the likes, comments, and most importantly for subscribing to Lovable Mafia Boss Story. God bless you in all your endeavors. We wish you all the very best in life with good health of mind and body. We love you, but God loves you more. The story you about to watch and listen to is talking about a Korean mafia boss that saw a black maid being beaten by her employer. What did he do? He decided to buy the entire hotel just to fire the employer. Pay rapt attention while we dive into the details of this story. Now click the subscription button if you have not done that, please. The heavy raised fist of Hwang Byung-chul cast a jagged shadow over Adesawa's face a second before the impact sent her reeling. She crashed into her metal cleaning cart, the screech of wheels against the marble floor echoing through the Grand Imperial's lobby like a gunshot. Cleaning sprays and white towels scattered across the gold-leafed floor as she hit the ground, her palms scraping raw against the stone, her maid's apron staining with the gray water of a spilled bucket. For a heartbeat, the busiest hotel in Seoul went deathly silent. Adesawa looked up from the floor, her vision blurring with tears of pain, at the man standing over her with veins bulging in his neck. Byung-chul, the manager who took pleasure in breaking those he couldn't buy. Stay in the dirt where you belong, you invisible parasite, Byung-chul spat, his voice trembling with unchecked rage. He had no idea who was watching from the periphery. No idea that the ghost he was beating, the woman who had arrived in this country with nothing but a prayer and a work visa, who had endured his insults for a year just to send every cent home, was no longer alone. He had no idea that the silent, sharply suited man leaning against the mahogany pillar was Kang Dae-sik. And he certainly had no idea that within 10 minutes, he wouldn't just be losing his job. He would be losing his entire world to the man who was already deciding how to destroy him. Drop a heart in the comment section, besties, if you already know this is about to be epic. Smash that like button and subscribe to the Lovable Mafia Boss Story. Your subscription means the world to me. Adesawa's day always began in the dark, long before the sun touched the tall glass towers of the city. By 5 a.m., she was already deep in the belly of the Grand Imperial Hotel, pulling on her stiff gray uniform. Her back ached before her shift even started. For 14 hours every day, Adesawa was a shadow. She moved through the golden hallways with a heavy cleaning cart, wiping away fingerprints that rich people left behind and vacuuming carpets that cost more than her family's house back in Nigeria. The hotel was a world of sparkling chandeliers and soft music, but Adesawa only saw the dirt. She saw the spilled wine on the velvet chairs and the muddy footprints in the marble lobby. As she scrubbed, she kept her head down. In a place this fancy, the staff were supposed to be invisible. Guests walked right past her as if she were a piece of furniture. To them, she didn't have a name or a story. She was just the girl in the apron holding a spray bottle. But inside her mind, Adesawa lived in a much brighter place. Every time she polished a mirror, she wasn't just looking at her tired reflection. She was imagining her own future. She kept a small, worn-out notebook tucked in her pocket. In it, she wrote down her dreams of opening her own catering business. She saved every penny she could, skipping meals and walking miles to work just to put a little more money in her dream fund. She wanted to cook the spicy, flavorful food of her home and be her own boss. She wanted a life where no one could tell her she didn't matter. By the 10th hour of her shift, her legs felt like lead. The smell of bleach made her dizzy, and the constant shouting from the kitchen was a headache that never went away. Still she kept moving. She told herself that every floor she mopped brought her one step closer to her own kitchen. She just had to stay quiet, work hard, and remain invisible for a little while longer. She had survived the heat of Lagos and the fear of moving to a new country alone. She could survive a long day at a hotel. She didn't know that today, her dream of being invisible was about to end, and the life she had worked so hard to build was about to change forever. If Adesawa was the shadow of the hotel, Hwang Byung-chul was the storm. He did not walk through the halls. He marched, his polished black shoes clicking loudly against the floor like a warning. Everyone knew that sound. When it got closer, housekeepers tucked themselves into supply closets and waiters straightened their ties, holding their breath until he passed. Byung-chul didn't just want the hotel to be clean. He wanted everyone inside it to be afraid of him. He loved the power he had over people who couldn't fight back. On this afternoon, the storm stopped right in front of the elevators. A young boy named Min-ho, a new staff member who was only 19, was struggling with a heavy cart of luggage. In his hurry to clear the way for a guest, one of the suitcases slipped and tapped against the wall. It didn't even leave a mark, but for Byung-chul, it was an excuse to strike. "Stop!" Byung-chul screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The young boy froze, his face turning pale. Byung-chul stepped into the boy's personal space, leaning so close that their foreheads almost touched. "Do you have any idea how much this hotel is worth? Do you think we hired you to destroy the walls?" "I'm sorry, sir," Min-ho whispered, his hands shaking on the handle of the cart. "It was an accident. I was just trying to." "I don't care what you were trying to do," Byung-chul interrupted, his face twisting with a mean smile. He reached out and flicked the boy's name tag. "You are lucky I even let someone like you breathe the same air as our guests. You are small. You are replaceable. I could fire you right now and have 10 people begging for your job before you even reach the exit." He spent the next 5 minutes tearing the boy down, insulting his clothes, his speed, and his intelligence. He seemed to grow taller and more confident with every mean word he spoke. He didn't care that guests were beginning to stare or that the boy looked like he was about to cry. To Byung-chul, this was the best part of his day. He felt like a king ruling over a kingdom of servants. Adesawa watched from the end of the hallway, clutching her mop handle so hard her knuckles turned white. She knew that look in Byung-chul's eyes. It was the look of a bully who thought he was untouchable. He finished his lecture by kicking the cart back toward the boy, nearly hitting his shins. As Byung-chul turned away, he smoothed his suit jacket and checked his reflection in a nearby mirror, looking very proud of himself. He had no idea that his reign as a tyrant was about to hit a wall he couldn't climb over. The heavy glass doors of the Grand Imperial swung open, but there was no loud entrance. Kong Dae-sik didn't arrive with a shouting crowd or a line of guards. He stepped into the lobby quietly, his movements smooth and controlled. He wore a dark charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than the cars parked outside, but he didn't wear it to show off. He wore it like armor. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another wealthy businessman, but there was a weight to his presence that made the air in the room feel heavy. Dae-sik didn't go to the front desk to check in. Instead, he walked toward a quiet corner near a massive marble pillar and waited. His eyes, cold and sharp as glass, began to scan the room. He wasn't looking at the expensive paintings or the giant chandeliers. He was looking at the people. He was there because his lawyers had told him this hotel was a perfect investment, a prize to be added to his empire. But Dae-sik didn't trust papers or reports. He wanted to see the truth. He wanted to see how this kingdom operated when the leaders thought no one. He watched a maid in a gray uniform, Adesawa, carefully polishing the brass luggage racks. He noticed how she kept her head down, her movements quick and nervous. He saw the way the other workers hurried past, their eyes darting around as if they were waiting for something bad to happen. Dae-sik had spent his whole life in a world of predators and prey, and he could smell fear from across the room. This hotel looked perfect on the outside, but inside it felt like a place where the people were being crushed. From his spot in the shadows, he saw Hwang Byung-chul appear. The manager was busy bowing to a rich guest, his face covered in a fake, sugary smile. But as soon as the guest turned away, the smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure disgust as he snapped his fingers at a waiter. Dae-sik stayed perfectly still, his hands deep in his pockets. He was a man of silence and secrets, a mafia boss who knew that the loudest person in the room was usually the weakest. He watched Byung-chul's eyes fix on the girl with the cleaning cart. Dae-sik didn't move, but his gaze narrowed. He wasn't just a buyer anymore. He was a witness. He wanted to see exactly what kind of man Byung-chul was before he decided whether to save this hotel or burn it down. The trap was set, and the manager was walking right into it, completely unaware that the man who now owned his future was standing only a few feet away, watching his every move. The peace of the afternoon shattered when a high-pitched scream rang out near the elevators. A wealthy woman in a fur coat was frantically patting her pockets, her face twisting with panic. "My diamond bracelet! It's gone!" she shrieked. "It was right here on my wrist when I got off the elevator." Within seconds, Byung-chul appeared, sliding across the floor with his fake, worried smile. He promised the woman he would find it immediately, but as soon as he turned around, his eyes landed on Adesawa. Adesawa was standing nearby, quietly replacing the liners in the trash bins. She hadn't even been near the woman, but Byung-chul didn't care about the truth. He saw a chance to show off his power. He marched over to her, his face turning a dark, angry red. "You!" he barked, pointing a finger inches from her nose. "You were the only servant in this hallway. Give it back right now." Adesawa's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Sir, I don't have it," she said, her voice small but steady. "I was working on the bins the whole time. I didn't see any jewelry." "Don't lie to me," Byung-chul roared. The guests in the lobby stopped to watch, and a heavy silence fell over the room. "I know how people like you are. You see something shiny and you think it's yours. Empty your pockets." Adesawa's hands shook as she pulled out her small notebook and a pack of tissues. There was no diamond. This only made Byung-chul angrier because he looked like a fool in front of the guests. He grabbed her cleaning cart and shoved it aside, sending her supplies crashing to the floor. "You hid it somewhere else then," he yelled. Adesawa tried to step back, but she tripped over the mop bucket. Before she could find her balance, Byung-chul lost all control. He reached out and grabbed her by the shoulder, shaking her so hard her head snapped back. "I am the boss here," he screamed, and then it happened. He raised his hand and swung it with all his might. The sound of his palm hitting Adesawa's face was sharp and loud, like a piece of wood snapping. The force of the blow sent her spinning. She crashed into the metal side of her cart and fell to the marble floor, her cheek burning and her vision swimming. She sat there in the dirt, her heart breaking even more than her body. She looked up expecting someone, anyone, to help her, but most people just looked away. She felt completely alone on the cold, hard floor. She didn't realize that in the shadows by the pillar, the man in the charcoal suit had finally stopped watching and started moving. The lobby of the Grand Imperial Hotel was full of people, but for Adesawa, it felt like an empty desert. As she sat on the cold floor, her face throbbing with pain, she looked around for a hand to pull her up. She saw a group of wealthy businessmen in silk ties. They looked at her for a second, then quickly turned their heads, pretending to be very interested in their gold watches or the paintings on the wall. They didn't want to get involved in a servant's problem. To them, helping a maid wasn't worth the risk of ruining their afternoon. Near the front desk, the other staff members stood like statues. Adesawa saw the young boy, Minho, clutching a luggage rack so hard his knuckles were white. His eyes were wide with fear and sadness, but he didn't move. He knew that if he spoke up, Byung-chul would destroy him too. The older housekeepers whispered to each other, their faces full of pity, but they stepped backward into the shadows. They had families to feed and rent to pay. In this hotel, being a hero meant being fired, and no one could afford to lose their job. The lady in the fur coat, who had lost her bracelet, didn't even look sorry. She stood there with her arms crossed, tapping her foot. "Well," she asked Byung-chul, ignoring the woman bleeding on the floor, "are you going to find my jewelry or not? I don't have all day." She spoke as if Adesawa wasn't even a human being, but just a broken tool that was slowing down her schedule. The social imbalance was like a giant wall that no one could climb. On one side were the people with money and power, who thought they were too important to care. On the other side were the workers, who were too afraid to care. Adesawa felt the weight of everyone's eyes, but she felt no warmth. The silence of the crowd was almost louder than Byung-chul's shouting. It was the sound of 100 people deciding that her life didn't matter as much as their comfort. Byung-chul looked around at the silent crowd and felt like a king. Since no one was stopping him, he thought he was right. He took another step toward Adesawa, his shadow covering her completely. He raised his hand again, ready to finish what he started, believing that the world would just keep watching and doing nothing. He was so busy enjoying the silence that he didn't hear the heavy, steady footsteps coming from behind him. He didn't notice that the wall between the powerful and the weak was about to be torn down by someone much more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Byung-chul's hand was high in the air. His fingers curled into a fist as he prepared to strike Adesawa again. He felt powerful and unstoppable. But before his arm could move an inch forward, it stopped dead. A hand had clamped around his wrist like a cold iron vice. The grip was so strong and sudden that Byung-chul gasped, his breath hitching in his throat. He tried to yank his arm away, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Slowly, Byung-chul turned his head to see who would dare to touch him. Standing right behind him was the man in the charcoal suit. Kong Dae-sik didn't look angry. His face was as calm as a frozen lake, but his eyes were dark and terrifying. The air around them seemed to drop 20 degrees. The noisy lobby went from silent to absolutely freezing. Even the guests felt the sudden change and pulled back, realizing that a real predator had entered the room. "You've done enough," Dae-sik said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was deep and heavy, cutting through the air like a blade. Byung-chul's face went from red to a sickly white. He looked at the expensive watch on the man's wrist and the perfect fit of his suit. He realized this wasn't a worker or a low-level guest. Who are you?" Byung-chul stammered, his legs starting to shake. "This is hotel business. This girl is a thief. Let go of me." Dae-sik didn't let go. Instead, he squeezed harder, forcing Byung-chul to drop to his knees just to stop his wrist from snapping. Dae-sik looked down at Adesawa, who was still trembling on the floor, and then back at the manager. "She is not a thief," Dae-sik said, his voice turning even colder. "But you are. You are stealing her dignity, and you are doing it in a building that no longer belongs to you." Byung-chul's eyes went wide. He didn't understand what the man meant, but he felt a fear he had never known before. He had spent his whole life bullying the weak, but now he was looking into the eyes of someone who truly ruled the shadows. Dae-sik released the manager's wrist with a disgusted flick, as if he were throwing away a piece of trash. He didn't look at Byung-chul again. He reached out a hand toward Adesawa, waiting for her to take it. The power in the room had shifted completely. The king of the hotel was now shivering on the floor, and the man from the shadows was just getting started. Byung-chul scrambled to his feet, clutching his sore wrist. He tried to straighten his suit, his face twisting back into a desperate sneer. "You can't talk to me like that," he shouted, though his voice cracked. "I am the manager. I will have you arrested for trespassing. Security, get this man out of my lobby." He looked around wildly, waiting for his guards to rush in and save him, but nobody moved. The security team stood by the doors, their eyes fixed on the man in the charcoal suit. They recognized the face that Byung-chul was too blind to see. Dae-sik didn't even look at the guards. He pulled a sleek black smartphone from his pocket and tapped the screen just once. He held the phone to his ear for only a few seconds. "It's me," he said into the device. "Execute the Grand Imperial contract now. All of it. I want the deed in my inbox before I hang up." He lowered the phone and looked at Byung-chul with a gaze that felt like a death sentence. "What are you talking about?" Byung-chul laughed nervously, his eyes darting toward the wealthy guests who were now whispering. "You think you can just buy a world-class hotel with a phone call? You're crazy." Suddenly, every tablet and computer behind the front desk began to beep at once. The head receptionist gasped as her screen turned bright red with an urgent notification. Her hands shook as she printed a document that had just appeared. She ran over, her face pale, and handed the paper to Byung-chul. As he read the words, the color drained from his skin until he looked like a ghost. At the very bottom of the page was the official seal of the Kong Group. "I was going to buy this hotel tomorrow morning," Dae-sik said, his voice echoing through the silent lobby. "I had a meeting scheduled. I was going to take my time." He stepped closer to Byung-chul, who backed away until he hit the marble pillar. "But I decided to buy it 3 minutes ago instead. I don't like waiting when there is trash that needs to be cleared out." Hi besties, before we continue, do me a favor right now. Smash that like button and subscribe to Lovable Mafia Boss Story just to encourage and support our humble beginning. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you so much, besties. Now let's continue with our story. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The man they had ignored wasn't just a guest. He was the owner of the ground they were standing on. He had bought $1 billion business just to deal with a bully. Dae-sik looked at the document in Byung-chul's trembling hands and then back at Adesawa, who was watching from the floor in total shock. "This building has a new master now," Dae-sik said quietly. "And the first thing the new master is going to do is clean up the mess you made." The lobby was quiet now, the air finally feeling clear and light. Adesawa remained on the floor for a moment, her mind trying to catch up with how fast her life had changed. The man who had haunted her dreams and made her every day a nightmare was gone, dragged out into the street like the very trash he used to complain about. She looked down at her scraped hands and her wet uniform, feeling a sudden rush of heat in her face from the embarrassment of the scene. But then, a shadow fell gently over her. It wasn't a dark or scary shadow. It felt like a shield. Kong Dae-sik knelt down in front of her. He didn't look like the scary mafia boss the stories whispered about. Up close, his eyes were still intense, but the coldness had melted away into something that looked like respect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a soft white handkerchief made of the finest silk. He didn't just drop it. He handed it to her as if she is a princess. "Wipe your face," he said softly. His voice was no longer a blade. It was a steady hand. Adesawa took the cloth, the silk feeling cool against her burning cheek. As she wiped away the dust and a single tear, she noticed the silence in the lobby had changed. The guests weren't looking away anymore. They were watching with wide eyes as the most powerful man in the city treated a maid with more kindness than they had ever seen. Dae-sik stood up and offered his hand to her. Adesawa hesitated for a split second, then reached out and took it. His grip was firm and sure, pulling her up until she was standing tall on the marble floor. She realized she didn't have to look at her shoes anymore. She could look him right in the eye. "This hotel is under new leadership now," Dae-sik told her, loud enough for the remaining staff to hear. "The old ways are over. We don't need managers who rule with fear. We need someone who knows what it means to work hard. We need someone who understands respect because they've had to fight for it." He looked around the golden lobby and then back at her. "I think the person for that job is standing right in front of me." Adesawa felt a lump in her throat, but it wasn't from sadness. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't a ghost in the hallway or a name tag on a gray dress. She was a woman with a future. As Dae-sik walked with her toward the elevators, leaving her cleaning cart behind forever, a new sun seemed to rise inside the lobby. The long, dark night of her struggle was over. It was a new dawn, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was starting to live. Please let's know where you are watching from in the comment section if you are enjoying this story. Like and subscribe so we can be giving you all but the best stories. 6 months had passed since the day the marble floor felt like a prison. Now, Adesawa stood on the highest balcony of the Grand Imperial, looking out over the city lights that twinkled like fallen stars. She no longer wore a gray uniform or a plain apron. Instead, she wore a dress of deep emerald silk that moved like water whenever the cool night breeze caught it. She was the manager of the hotel now, but tonight, the building felt less like a workplace and more like a home. She heard the familiar, steady sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know it was Dae-sik. Over the last few months, He had been a constant shadow by her side, guiding her as she turned the hotel into a place of kindness and respect. He stopped next to her, leaning his elbows on the railing. For a long time they just watched the city in silence. Dae-sik was always a man of few words, but tonight, the silence felt different. Felt heavy with a secret. "I remember the first time I saw you," Dae-sik said, his voice quiet against the wind. He wasn't looking at the city anymore. He was looking at her. "You were standing in that lobby, surrounded by people who didn't see your worth. But I saw it. I saw a woman who was stronger than the man trying to break her." He paused, and for the first time, Adesawa saw his hand tremble just a little. The man who wasn't afraid of anything seemed nervous. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black box. When he opened it, a diamond the size of a marble caught the light from the moon, glowing with a fire that made the city lights look dim. It was a ring that cost more than the entire hotel building, but to Dae-sik, it was just a symbol. "Adesawa," he said, using her name with a softness that made her heart skip. "People think I bought this hotel because I wanted a new business. They think I did it just to fire a bully. But that's not the whole truth." He took her hand in his skin warm against hers. "I bought this place because I couldn't stand the thought of you being anywhere else. I bought it because I wanted to build a world where you would never have to hide again. But I don't want to rule it alone." He dropped to one knee, the powerful Mafia boss appearing small and vulnerable for the first time in his life. "I want you to be my wife. I want you to rule this empire by my side, not as a manager but as my queen." Adesawa felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked at the man who had seen her when she was invisible and loved her when she was broken. She didn't need the expensive ring to know her answer. She squeezed his hand and whispered, "Yes," and as he slid the diamond onto her finger, the girl who once cleaned the floors realized she was finally where she belonged. The Grand Imperial Hotel was glowing with more light than ever before. Tonight was the engagement gala, and the most famous people in the city were lined up at the entrance. The same elites who once walked past Adesawa without a glance were now dressed in their finest jewelry, whispering her name with excitement. They weren't looking away tonight. They were all waiting for a chance to be in her presence, hoping she would forget that they had ignored her when she was down on the floor. Inside the ballroom, the air smelled like expensive flowers and perfume. When the gold doors finally opened, the room went completely silent. Adesawa stepped into the light, looking like a dream. She wore a custom gown that shimmered like a starry night, its long train flowing behind her as she walked. On her arm was Dae-sik, who looked at her with a pride that everyone in the room could feel. As they moved through the crowd, the wealthy guests bowed their heads in respect. They weren't bowing to her money or her dress. They were bowing to the woman who had become the heart of the hotel. Outside, in the cold, dark street across from the hotel, a man in a dirty, stained jumpsuit stood holding a heavy trash bag. It was Byung-chul. He was now a janitor at a small, crumbling building down the road. His hands were rough and his face was tired. He watched through the giant glass windows of the Grand Imperial as the woman he once called a ghost took her place at the center of the world. He remembered how he had told her to stay in the dirt. Now he was the one standing in the shadows, ignored by everyone who passed by. Byung-chul watched as Dae-sik leaned in and whispered something into Adesawa's ear, making her laugh. The sight felt like a punch to his stomach. He had tried to ruin her life, but all he had done was help her find her throne. A security guard from the hotel spotted him lingering on the sidewalk and waved him away, treating him like a nuisance. Byung-chul lowered his head and walked back into the darkness, his heart heavy with the weight of his own mistakes. Back inside, Adesawa didn't see the man in the street. She didn't have time to look back at the past. She stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by light and music. She looked at the staff members who were now treated with kindness, and she looked at the man who had changed everything for her. She wasn't just a maid who got lucky. She was the literal queen of the night. As the music began to play, She realized that the best part of her new life wasn't the fancy gown or the bowing guests. It was the fact that she would never have to be invisible ever again. The day of the wedding arrived, and the Grand Imperial Hotel was transformed into a sea of color and music. It was a celebration unlike anything the city had ever seen. The air was filled with the rhythmic beat of Nigerian talking drums and the soft, elegant sounds of Korean flutes. Guests from all over the world filled the seats, watching as two different cultures became one. The lobby was decorated with bright African fabrics and delicate silk lanterns, showing that this wasn't just a marriage between two people, but a bridge between two worlds. Adesawa appeared at the back of the room, and a gasp went through the crowd. She looked breathtaking in a custom gown that combined the bold, beautiful patterns of her Nigerian heritage with the graceful lines of a traditional Korean dress. She walked with her head held high, no longer the girl who was afraid to be seen. Every step she took on the white aisle felt like a victory over every hard day she had ever faced. At the front of the room stood Dae-sik. He wasn't wearing his usual dark armor of a suit. Instead, he wore traditional wedding robes that honored his family's history. As he watched Adesawa walk toward him, the cold, frozen look he usually wore completely vanished. His eyes softened and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. In that moment, he wasn't the scary mafia boss or the powerful businessman that everyone feared. He was just a man who was completely devoted to the woman he loved. He looked at her as if she were the only person in the entire world. When she finally reached him, he took her hand. His grip was gentle, but it felt as strong as steel. They stood before their friends and family, promising to protect and cherish each other forever. The ceremony was full of laughter and happy tears, a perfect mix of ancient traditions and new beginnings. Even the most serious guests couldn't help but smile at the sight of them together. As the ceremony ended, the couple turned to walk back down the aisle as husband and wife. The camera panned down for a final shot that said more than words ever could. Their hands were tightly intertwined, the giant diamond ring on Adesawa's finger catching the light. It was the ultimate symbol of their journey. Those hands represented a power that wasn't used to hurt others, but to protect them. The girl who was once beaten and the man who was once cold were now a team that nothing could break. They walked out of the hotel and into their new life, leaving the shadows behind forever. Then, from the journey of Adesawa and Dae-sik, here are some core values that drive this story. 1. The power of human dignity. This story shows that every person deserves respect, no matter what their job is. Adesawa was treated like she was invisible because she was a maid, but her value didn't change just because she was holding a mop. The story teaches us that true character is seen in how you treat those who can do nothing for you. 2. Protective justice. Dae-sik uses his immense power and wealth not to bully others, but to stop a bully. This value highlights that having power comes with the responsibility to protect the vulnerable. Instead of just walking away, he used his resources to change a wrong into a right, and created a safe environment for everyone. 3. Resilience and self-worth. Adesawa's journey is about more than just being rescued. It is about her own strength. Even when she was being mistreated, she kept her dream notebook and worked toward her future. Her value shows that you should never let someone else's cruelty define who you are. By the end, she isn't just a queen because of a ring, but because she always had the heart of one. Let us know your own moral lessons in the comment section. And thank you for watching, dearest. If you did enjoy this story, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the lovable Mafia boss story to encourage our little beginning. Your support means the world to us.